Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for making out here so early this morning to join our morning lecture. But I'm sure you won't regret, since we are having here a very special guest, Mr. Haruhiko Kuroda, who is currently the president of Asian Development Bank. Today, he is going to give us a talk on economic outlook and the future challenges for Asian economies. As you know, the world economy is shifting its gear from the early stage of recovery to an expansion path. But this recovery and expansion was largely induced by the Asian growth. But many questions remain. Will Asia continue to lead the global economic growth? What kinds of bottlenecks or obstacles Asian economies may face in coming years? And what kind of role Asian economies should and can play to secure a better world economic order? Well, I think and I hope Mr. Kuroda will provide some clues on these critically important issues at the moment. Well, at this point, I have to tell you that we have read a very tight schedule this morning. It is not our fault, but Mr. Kuroda has to leave somewhat earlier than scheduled to see President Myung-Bak Lee. So I would like to have excuse from you on this point. So I won't spend too much time. I will be very brief in commenting on Mr. Kuroda's brilliant career. Well, as I said, he is the president of ADB at the moment. He has been in that position for the past 7 years. Before that, he spent a couple of years to serve for the Koizumi administration as a special advisor while he teaching at the graduate school of Hidochibashi University. But he spent most of his career with Japan's Ministry of Finance, where he rose to vice minister in 1999. Is that right? Yeah. And for 4 years he served as vice minister there. Actually, he joined Ministry of Finance in 1967, right after he earned his BA in law from the University of Tokyo. So to save time, I will stop here to comment on his career, and I'd like to let him give you a speech. And please join me in welcoming him.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nam, for your kind introduction. And distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it is an honor to be here this morning. I would like to thank our host, the Institute for Global Economics, for the gracious hospitality and preparations for today's breakfast lecture. Developing Asia has rebounded strongly from the global crisis. With its robust growth, developing Asia has provided another engine of growth to the world economy when the traditional markets faltered. I think it is extremely important that we start from this perspective of what I call developing Asia's new vantage point. The economic rise of developing Asia, particularly after the recent global financial crisis, clearly provides a dynamic vantage point for the region. With its V-shaped recovery firmly in place, developing Asia has led the world out of recession. Yes, the region's remarkable resilience is partly due to its limited exposure to toxic assets that sparked the global financial crisis. However, in large part, it also reflects the successful reforms and restructuring undertaken in the aftermath of our own crisis of 1997 to 98. The Asian financial crisis sowed the seeds for cooperation and integration. The more recent crisis has strengthened Asia's commitment to bring regional integration to the next level. Stronger regional cooperation made the region's successful response to the crisis possible. And now, following a year in which Korea successfully hosted the G20 summit, we join the forces of the global community to work toward strong, sustainable, and balanced global growth. Across the region's widely diverse economies, authorities have moved on from recovery to the longer-term goal of sustained growth. Asia must broaden and deepen its development strategies to reach more people to help reduce the poverty that remains our region's most daunting challenge. Ultimately, it is our collective responsibility to build a new foundation for sustainable development and economic growth that can be shared globally. With this goal in mind, I will address 4 questions. First, what is the economic prospect for developing Asia? Second, what are the medium to long-term challenges? Third, what is ADB doing to help address those challenges? And finally, what role can the region play as Asia increasingly takes a front row seat in managing global economic reform? Developing Asian economies have grown impressively over a period of nearly 30 years. The region's real GDP in purchasing power parity terms climbed from about $3.3 trillion in 1980 to an estimated $24.5 trillion in 2009. This is an increase of 7.5 times, compared with just 3 times for the world economy during the same period. Real per capita GDP in the region more than quadrupled during the same period, while average global income less than doubled. Such robust, prolonged growth has placed the region squarely on the global economic map as one of 3 centers of gravity in the world economy, along with the European Union and the United States. Developing Asia's remarkable performance reflects its robust economic fundamentals. These include high savings and high investment rates, openness to foreign trade and technology, investment in education and human capital, flexible labor markets, and sound fiscal and monetary policies. The past crisis provided an impetus for the necessary and sometimes painful financial, monetary, and fiscal reforms. These in turn created the foundation for monetary and fiscal buffers, allowing for ample stimulus to blunt the worst effects of the recent global economic downturn. All the more remarkable is that the region's sharp turnaround happened against the backdrop of continued fragility and weakness in advanced economies traditionally the region's major export markets. It appears a decade can make quite a difference. In the late 1990s, Asia looked to advanced economies for solving the region's problem. Today, the world turns to Asia for helping hand. I'm very optimistic about developing Asia's short-term growth prospects. The region's surprisingly robust and speedy recovery from the global crisis was marked by an estimated growth of 8.6% in 2010. With recovery in advanced economies still fragile, last year's export rebound will likely moderate in 2011. Yet we currently forecast 2011 GDP growth to moderate somewhat, but remain vibrant at above 7%. Estimated 2010 growth of China is above 10%, with the growth this year forecast at a more sustainable 9%. India's GDP expanded an estimated 8.5% last year and should grow a bit faster this year as private demand continues to grow. Although developing Asia's robust growth is set against the backdrop of manageable inflation, about 4% for both 2010 and 2011, inflationary pressures must be monitored closely, particularly in countries where there are signs of overheating and in light of rising world commodity prices, including oil prices. The projected moderation in economic growth this year may be seen as normalization. It basically represents a return to more sustainable growth rates as the post-crisis recovery takes firm hold. As I mentioned at the outset, the big question for the region is whether this post-crisis recovery can be turned into longer-term sustained high growth. And how can Asia successfully sustain growth beyond the recovery while continuing to deal with large collective challenges? Let me address three critical issues that will determine developing Asia's future success. First, rebalancing sources of growth, which should help the orderly resolution of global imbalances as well. Second, restructuring growth strategies to ensure they are more inclusive. And third, doing all this without harming our greatest asset, the Earth, environmentally sustainable growth. First, Asia's export-led growth model has generated substantial benefits and will continue to do so. However, the crisis highlighted the risk of unbalanced growth. As I mentioned, economic recovery in advanced economies remain fragile. To turn this post-crisis recovery into a sustained and balanced growth, there should be collective effort from both developed and developing parts of the world to bring an orderly workout of global imbalances. Developing Asia needs to strengthen its domestic and regional demand, while advanced economies put their private and public sector balance sheets in order. As we will likely see a long period of sluggish demand growth in advanced economies, increased consumption and investment in developing Asia is critical to sustaining global growth. For many developing Asian economies, the important challenge is how to rebalance sources of economic growth by generating more domestic demand without undermining the benefits of trade. With emerging market economies growing rapidly, more demand should come from their own domestic private consumption. It means the diversification of export destinations intra-regionally and in other emerging markets, such as Latin America and Africa, should be accelerated. Developing Asia's trade profile should be also broadened to include trade of more final goods within the region. Rebalancing the sources of growth within Asia can help resolve global imbalances as well. At this time, surpluses are concentrated in just a few nations, particularly some rapidly growing economies in Asia, with a deficit primarily in just one country, the United States. Americans need to reduce their debt. Asia needs to invest its surplus to better finance its growing development requirements. Developing Asia has proven its capacity to produce. Now, it must show that it can also consume and invest wisely. Achieving this rebalancing will require demand-side policies that encourage household expenditure and increase private sector investment. It also requires supply-side policies that promote small and medium-sized enterprises and service industries catering to domestic demand. This will involve galvanizing the region's excess savings to help finance development, particularly in the larger, complex infrastructure projects needed to keep the engine of rapid growth well lubricated. ADB estimates that $8 trillion is needed through 2020 just to keep infrastructure in line with growth projections in Asia. All of this requires more effective and efficient resource allocation, another part of the rebalancing process. Second, Asia must ensure that its evolving growth paradigm benefits as many people as possible. Whether promoting intra-regional trade, investing in domestic or cross-border infrastructure, or stimulating growth in services and small-medium enterprises, all strong drivers of domestic consumption, the outcome must be inclusive. What do we actually mean by inclusive? Despite our achievement, we must not forget the two faces of Asia. Poverty continues to be the paramount challenge facing the region. According to an ADB study, 14 out of 20 developing Asian economies saw their Gini coefficient, a measure of inequality, increase in recent years as economic growth accelerated. Developing Asia may be home to 60% of the world's population, but it is home to 2/3 of its poor. Put in perspective, that means 1.8 billion people in our region today live on less than $2 per day. There is also non-income poverty. For example, while income poverty has fallen considerably, hunger has fallen only marginally. In South Asia, a staggering 45% of children under the age of 5 are underweight. By comparison, the sub-Saharan Africa level is 27%. What does this all tell us? While high economic growth is desirable, and while developing Asia has succeeded in reducing income poverty significantly, we must redouble our efforts to guarantee that people have equal access to opportunities and basic social services. These require greater investment in education and health, particularly for the poor. Expanding social protection to the informal sector and rural household is another policy option that nurtures inclusive growth. For many countries, developing rural infrastructure to connect the poor to markets and enable them to participate in the growth process is essential. Third, along with human capital, our environment begs for help. We are living in a world of scarce and finite resources. How do we ensure that we leave a sustainable environment and development legacy to future generations? Climate change and climate volatility are facts, and we saw it rear up in many ways these past 12 months. Events range from the devastating flood in Pakistan to the flood-drought equation in Australia and the recent winter storms across Europe and America. Rising sea levels and higher temperatures all have dramatic effects, forcing a large number of mostly poor to migrate. The economic and social implications of climate change are very serious. A recent ADB study focusing on Southeast Asia estimates that if nothing is done, the total cost of climate change for Indonesia, the Philippines, Thailand, and Vietnam could reach as high as 6.7% of their combined GDP each year by 2100. Sustainability cannot be achieved unless the world moves onto a low-carbon, climate-resilient development path that embraces both mitigation and adaptation. Environmentally sustainable growth must be considered a national, regional, and global public good. ADB is committed to reducing poverty in the region. Indeed, it is our overarching goal. When we consider loans and grants, technical assistance, or policy advice, we assess the impact on the poor. Our three strategic agendas, as outlined in our Strategy 2020, ADB's strategic framework for the next decade, are inclusive growth, environmentally sustainable growth, and regional integration. Whether providing assistance for building roads or improving a city's water supply, we ask how many of the beneficiaries are poor and how will it improve their lives. We know that economic growth is a necessary, although not sufficient, condition to achieve sustained poverty reduction and is thus a critical component in closing the development gap. After 44 years of operation, we also know it depends on the development of a country's private sector. Thus, we are increasingly focusing on public-private partnerships. Under Strategy 2020, we are scaling up support to private sector operations and development to reach half of our annual operations by 2020. ADB's assistance for transport, energy, water, and other infrastructure, and basic public services such as healthcare and education help to widen the circle of opportunity so that all members of society can participate in and benefit from economic growth. This supports inclusive growth. Our support for environmentally friendly technologies such as clean and renewable energy sources and energy efficiency improvement measures helps developing Asia address environmental sustainability, including climate change. We also work to adopt environmental safeguards and strengthen institutions for their effective enforcement. Market failures induce public authorities to intervene in supervision, regulation, and better governance. This happened in developing Asia following the regional 97-98 crisis, and I believe it is happening on a global scale given the market failures that brought on the global crisis. ADB is extremely active in helping build stronger links among member countries in trade and finance and cooperation in economic surveillance. Lifting trade restrictions and strengthening intra-regional trade will help reduce Asia's overdependence on exports to industrial countries and increase their resilience to regional and global economic shocks. Through existing groups such as ASEAN, ASEAN Plus 3, which include, of course, China, Japan, and Korea, or the East Asia Summit process, ADB also works to ease trade, consolidate free trade agreements, and facilitate efficient capital flows and investment by broadening and deepening capital market. To conclude, developing Asia faces an opening of a new era. Emerging strongly from the crisis, developing Asia should now work shoulder to shoulder with the world's major powers to tackle the daunting challenges of ensuring the post-crisis world to reclaim the path to strong, sustainable, and balanced growth. Its vast diversity means that challenges vary in intensity across the region, but they should remain centered around rebalancing the sources of growth, making sure that growth benefits all, and passing the livable earth to the next generation without sacrificing growth. ADB is committed to working with communities, governments, civil society, academia, and other development partners to achieve balanced, inclusive, and sustainable growth across the Asia and Pacific region, which will also bring enormous benefits for the world at large. We are grateful for Korea's continuing support of these important goals and look forward to further strengthening our partnership. Because in the last 3 decades or so, the Korean economy has achieved remarkable progress in almost every corner of the economy. It is one of the front runners of green technologies, and it is really making Asia as a center of manufacturing activities of the world. And I'm quite sure that the government of Korea's strong support for economic cooperation in Asia and also in the world would greatly contribute to making Asia as well as the world more inclusive and environmentally sustainable. And as I said, we very much look forward to further strengthening our partnership in every area. We are passionate about our business and will continue to do our best toward the realization of an Asia and Pacific free of poverty. Thank you.
How many Koreans are working for the ADB and how many Japanese are working there? And what role Korea can play in ADB, and what role ADB can do for Korea, and also with regard to Japan.
Of course, initially Korea was a borrowing member country of ADB. ADB extended substantial amount of loans to Korea to invest in infrastructure, education, and so on and so forth. But quite quickly, Korea had graduated from assistance from ADB, and now Korea, as a developed country, is one of the major donors of ADB. As such, Korea provides financial resources to ADB to make ADB's assistance more effective and efficient. That is one part. Another part is human resource contribution. We have a fairly significant number of Korean staff at ADB. Currently, ADB has slightly more than 2,500 staff including support staff. Professional staff around 900. And among them, we have a significant number of Korean staff. At senior level, department head and so on and so forth, we have a few, actually 2 Korean staff. And I am quite sure that we will have even more senior staff from Korea in coming years. Thirdly, I think Korea's contribution to ADB is not limited to financial resources or human resources, but also intellectual resources. Korea, as I said in my initial statement, has developed very quickly from a developing country status to a developed economy within 3 decades. And this means that Korea's experience could provide very good lessons for developing countries in Asia. And here, I think ADB can learn from Korea's economic development in the last couple of decades and could disseminate those lessons learned from Korea's experience to developing countries in Asia, like China, India, Indonesia, Vietnam, and so on and so forth. So Korea's role in ADB is, I must say, expanding and will continue to expand.
Kuroda, I'm enjoying your speech. In this connection, I have 2 questions. First one is, as long as I know, recently ADB issued ADB bond in Vienna, and some of prominent business, including Caterpillar and McDonald's, also they have issued and successfully in a Vienna bond issuance. In these occasions as a ADB, how is your plan and scale of utilizing, mobilizing ADB bond in Vienna, and how is the connection with China in these cases? And in comparison with the ADB's fund issued in dollar terms and in yen, how do you compare these occasions? So that's my first question. And the second one is, all of us are quite familiar with Chiang Mai, ASEAN plus 3 of the Chiang Mai scheme or whatever it is. So in this new development, what is the role of ADB and how do you think you can contribute and play activity in this case? 2 questions. Thank you.
Issued renminbi bond twice in the past. First in China itself, and second quite recently in Hong Kong. This renminbi bond issued by ADB in Hong Kong was the first renminbi bond issued outside of China. In both cases, we used the proceeds of bond issue for private sector operations in China. As you know, China still maintains comprehensive sort of capital controls or foreign exchange controls. That means that unlike Korea or Japan or even Thailand, Malaysia, Singapore, when you issue renminbi bond, you cannot easily convert renminbi proceed into other currencies. There are a lot of regulations. On the other hand, of course, even to issue renminbi bond, it requires special permission and so on and so forth. So, although our private sector, ADB can invest in private companies, banks in developing countries, and actually in China we are expanding our private sector operations. And the private sector operations in China are basically in renminbi. So we need renminbi money, capital. And in order to acquire renminbi money, we have to issue renminbi bond. In the future, when China lift capital controls or lift foreign exchange control, then of course issue of renminbi bond is not will not be tightly linked with our private sector operation in China. Renminbi proceed can be easily converted into the dollar or the yen or Korean won or whatever, and we can use those currencies in whatever countries, developing countries in Asia. But at this moment, it's tightly linked with our operations in China. But within this constraint, we got very good terms and conditions, and actually the interest rate we pay on renminbi bond are even lower than the Chinese central government pay on its renminbi bond. So we got very favorable terms, and that favorable terms are used for private sector operations in China. And I think we can continue, and we hope that eventually capital controls and foreign exchange controls could be lifted. Then we can substantially increase renminbi bond issue for ADB's total operations in Asia as a whole. CHEMA initiative, as you know, is now expanded and multilateralized. Initially, it was a network of bilateral swap arrangements, but now it is a single $120 billion financial safety net. And it is almost kind of Asian monetary fund. And $120 billion is very significant, particularly for ASEAN countries. Of course, as you know, China has nearly $3 trillion foreign exchange reserves. Japan has $1 trillion foreign exchange reserves, and probably these are more than enough. But for many ASEAN countries, CMIM, CHEMA Initiative Multilateralization, provide very important safety net for their economies. And it will continue to be so. ADB from the outset has been involved in this exercise, establishment of the CHEMA initiative and expansion, multilateralization, and related to this CMIM, the Regional Economic Review and Policy Dialogue, ADB has been closely involved in. So we will continue to support ASEAN Plus 3 finance ministers' effort to establish a regional financial safety net for their economies.
I understand that you had a strong conviction that the region-wide exchange stability is essential for in trade promotion and economic development in Asia. I wonder, I also understand that you've been supporting the idea of having regional currency or even single currency in Asia. So I wonder if you have still plans to. So people say it would take some time. But do you have plans to expedite the timing of forming the regional currency?
I still believe that in the long run, there will be a regional currency in Asia. Despite the fact that the Eurozone has experienced significant difficulties in the last 12 months or so. Of course, in order to establish a common currency or a regional currency, you have to have a regional common market. As you can see, the European Union has established a really efficient common market, single market, before embarking on single currency establishment. Now, at this stage, only ASEAN is aiming at something like common market. Common market requires not just FTA or customs union, in which internal tariffs would be completely abolished. More than that, a common market requires various domestic regulations to be harmonized, mutual recognition system, and so on and so forth. Then the common market would emerge. Until now, there's no schedule, no blueprint for a common market for East Asia as a whole. Only for ASEAN, a common market blueprint exists. But then, based on the common market, a common currency, a single currency, a regional currency could be established. But this is also a quantum jump because you can see in order to establish a single currency, common currency, you have to abolish member currencies, and also you have to establish a single central bank. This is a very big political decision. And unless minimum kind of political consensus, similarity exists, it's very difficult. Particularly if all potential members of a common currency are democracies, then it may work. But if there are non-democratic countries, it's very difficult for democratic countries to give up their central banks or currencies. So first common market and then common currency, but in order to make quantum jump from common market to common currency, it's really big political decision. Even in Europe, as you know, not all members of the European Union are members of the Euro, only limited number. There are many non-Euro members of the European Union. This shows how difficult to make the quantum jump. And even now, as I said, the last 12 months showed it's not so easy to manage the single currency. Even among 15, 16 Euro members, which are fairly similar in their economic and political system, but still a lot of challenges. So, although I believe that in the long run there will be a common regional currency in Asia, but it will take several decades before it is established.
Okay. Let's see. As I said, we have a very strict schedule this morning because President Myung-Bang Lee offered him to meet him right after this session. So I promised him to wrap up this morning session by 8:10 sharp. So I think we will have to stop here, and I wish I could have another occasion to have longer discussion. I think I have many questions for you to ask, but I refrained myself. Okay, I will stop here and congratulate on your speech, and please give him a warm greetings.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.